Good evening and welcome. My name is Constance Butel. I'm the chair of the Community Sustainability Commission. And on behalf of the Sustainability Commission, the City of Benicia, we'd like to welcome you, and Dominican University, we'd like to welcome you to our third symposium of a 4-symposia series entitled Sustainable Benicia, Energy. Energy is our largest greenhouse gas producer in the city of Benicia. And not only if we address energy in a wise way, intelligent way, will we be reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but we will also be saving a lot of money. As you know, the cost of energy is going up. And so the focus on this series is really to look at energy, specifically how it affects us here in Benicia. The first symposium looked at renewables, non-renewables, and nuclear energy. The second symposium looked at renewables, tidal, solar, and wind. And tonight's symposium is going to look at energy applications and efficiencies for residential, commercial, and industrial. We are being broadcast on Channel 27, and the event is being filmed as well and will be available in its entirety on YouTube channels. So what we say tonight and the questions that you have for our panelists will be memorialized and will provide a lot of input for us going forward. I'd like to just thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to come. And I'd like to acknowledge that we have Kimball Goodman here, the chair of the Economic Development Board. And we have our Community Sustainability Commissioners, Kathy Carriage back at the camera, Raylyn Fiscalini at the door, Leanne Tupfer, our student rep from Benicia High School at the back, and ex officio member Marilyn Bardet have been working with us to make this symposia series happen. We'd like to thank Linda Seifert, our supervisor, chair of the Solano County Board of Supervisors, for moderating tonight. She will provide an introduction of each of the speakers. And how we'll handle this, if you haven't been to the symposium before, we have been passing out 3x5 cards for you to write your questions, and we'll keep replenishing them for each speaker. And then we'll collect them as the speakers are talking and make sure that they get up to Linda, and Laura Lee is going to filter them for Linda so she can have them in order and work that way. Each speaker will talk for about 20 minutes and then take questions for about another 10 minutes. And at the very end, after all the speakers have presented, we'll allow them to do Q&A among themselves. And whatever time remaining, if we have any questions that haven't been asked and answered, we'll fill in till 8:30 on that. So I have a very brief video about Benicia for those of you who don't know and love Benicia, as we all do. And I'll give you a context for our energy series. Kitty, if we could have that video.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Linda Seifert, and as Constance said, I currently serve as Chair of the Board of Supervisors for Solano County. I am privileged to have as part of my district the great city of Benicia. And so it's my pleasure also to wish you a good evening and welcome you to part 3 of the 3rd series of education and public outreach workshops that are developed by the Benicia Community Sustainability Commission and the Dominican University. This workshop, as Constance mentioned, is titled Sustainable Benicia: Energy Applications and Efficiencies, Home, Commercial, and Industrial. I personally want to congratulate the City of Benicia for taking leadership in Solano County in addressing sustainability and climate action. Benicia's general plan since 1999 has strongly emphasized the tenets of sustainability. Living and working in Benicia is such a way that meets today's needs without jeopardizing the ability of future generations to meet their needs. No other city in Solano County, nor the county itself, have stepped forward to address the issues like the city of Benicia has. As we set the stage for this evening's symposium, I wanted to read a quote from a Youth Thought speech. Those of us who are old enough remember Youth Thought. This is from 1970. And he said, "As we watch the sun go down, evening after evening, through the smog across the poisoned waters of our native earth, we must ask ourselves seriously whether we really wish some future universal historian on another planet to say about us, with all their genius and with all their skill, they ran out of foresight in air and food and water and ideas." And so we know that's not the truth about this city. So as we focus this evening's symposium on the first step in energy sustainability and reducing or eliminating energy demand, first through intelligent changes in behavior and through smart energy retrofitting and mitigation. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce the speakers that will be making presentations. I will call on each speaker and just let them know that they have the 20 minutes to make their presentation. And as Constance said, please write down your questions and we'll take the questions for the 10 minutes. The first speaker this evening is Martha Amram, and she is the CEO and founder of What's On, which provides web tools to help consumers manage their home and personal energy use. Over 250,000 consumers have used What's On, personalized wizards, and their recommendations. What's On also mounts energy savings programs for cities, schools, and military bases, leveraging its technology assets for broad reach and cost-effective savings. Previously, she was the CEO of Vocomo Software, a voice software company, chief economist for PLX Systems, like the writing is really small. A patent and copyright software company, and co-founder of Glaze Creek Partners, a consulting firm she's sold to Navigant Consulting. She's the co-author of 2 books published by the Harvard Business School Press and a 3rd book published by McGraw-Hill. She's a frequent speaker on residential energy efficiency and business strategy. She's a senior fellow of the Millikan Institute, where she has written reports on financial innovations in the biotech and clean tech industries. She also holds a PhD in applied economics from MIT's Sloan School of Management. Please join me in giving a hearty welcome to the extraordinary Martha Amram. Martha.
Hi, I'm Martha Amram, CEO of Watson, and thank you for having me. Before we dig into energy efficiency, I wanted to talk about the world's energy markets. They've changed enormously in the last few years, and so I'll be speaking about that. If we could have the next slide. And then I'll move on to energy efficiency, industrial, residential, small commercial, and then also the economic impact. What does it mean for our communities? And as you know, Watson has been offering a residential program here in Benicia for the last 2 years. So I have a few slides that show some of our results, which are really stellar. Next slide, please. So in the world energy and carbon markets, if we look at all the pieces separately, in the next slide I'll try and put them together, but let's review the separate pieces first. First of all is the carbon market. You know, here in the US it's a voluntary market, and in Europe it's a mandatory market. But unfortunately in Europe, so many businesses got grandfathered in, and the trading rules are so mixed and mired in debate that carbon prices have fallen by 60% in the last year, and they are currently at an all-time low, about $8 per ton. The market is in such a disarray, some people think it might collapse and go away. Gasoline market is really, what we're really talking about here is the oil market. And what we see is with the rise of India and China, Brazil is now being an exporter, but it also has great demand for oil, that the world demand has lifted up and is not expected to decrease. So U.S. imports are falling as we do more in national energy exploration and development, and also imports from Canada, Canadian tar sand supply, instead of the Middle East. So when I talk about imports here, it's actually shifting to Canada from the Middle East. This means that the carbon content of our gasoline is going up because in tar sands, it takes energy to change the tar sands form of petroleum into something that we can ship down the pipelines and process in our refineries. So it takes energy to get it ready to put it into our refineries. So we're emitting carbon both up in Canada and down in Houston when we process it, and then in our cars when we burn it. So the carbon content of gasoline will be going up, and we'll have our same high price levels. In contrast, natural gas is now at a 10-year low, and we've all heard about fracking, the exploration of natural gas in seams and like the Allegheny area and in Texas, North Dakota. And then there's also other ways to get natural gas out. So what we're seeing is an abundance of natural gas here in the US. And this is totally changing energy markets, where you see coal plants shifting to natural gas because it's cheaper. And we see manufacturing plants opening because now they have a new low-cost supply for both energy and feedstock for the chemical supplies. So expecting continued low prices for natural gas for the foreseeable future. The resources are vast. And we turn to coal. As utilities are switching to natural gas, the coal mines began exporting coal to China and India. So their production was pretty flat. But now China and India are also finding an abundance of natural gas. So coal production is actually coming down, and we're expecting to be able to shut coal mines. Electricity is a different kind of thing because it's a secondary product and it has some resources behind it. But specific to the electricity industry is nationwide, we expect that there will be twice the amount of spending on the grid infrastructure than there has been in the last decade. The grid nationwide needs some upgrade and repair, and we're also trying to get ready for the smart grid. So spending will double, and at the same time, renewables are going up. Many, many states have renewable goals, such as let's have 20% renewables by the year 2020. Technologies in concentrating solar and other types of clean technologies have lowered the price of renewables. And so what we're seeing is that electricity prices both going up from the grid, and then as we move to renewables, not a big impact. So we're not expecting big price increases above historical rates in electricity. And then finally with nuclear power, because of the regulatory burden on nuclear power plants, it takes 12 to 14 years to construct them. And many of them stop midstream due to regulatory change or concerns or price concerns. And so it's very hard to finance the nuclear power plants. There's a recent report out of UC Berkeley that says the technology is there, but you're unable to finance it. So we don't expect to see a lot of growth in nuclear power. Next slide, please. And as we put it all together, thank you. what we see is that the U.S. will become energy secure. We're going to decrease our imports from the Middle East. It's already started. It will get even more so. And this breaks apart a natural alignment that had been together of the green people who wanted to reduce carbon and those who wanted to get us off of Mideast oil. In fact, the two paths are diverging now. Because of the tar sands and the increased carbon content of tar sands, you see environmentalists often opposing that, whereas those who are interested solely in U.S. energy security saying this is a good idea. We have more strategic risk in the Middle East. As we pull down our spending over there, we will not be defending the Straits of Hormuz possibly as much. That's a $50 billion a year proposition. So we'll see shifts in our strategic interests and how we spend money. And on the manufacturing, as I mentioned, we're going to see more manufacturing here in the U.S. with cheaper energy supplies. And finally, the environmental cost. I just point out that we're talking about fracking, we're talking about tar sands. Synfuels is another way of converting, energy in one form into a petroleum product. And then finally, opening up Arctic oil as the polar ice cap opens up through melting. So there are environmental concerns throughout. What does this all mean for energy efficiency? And like if we're a resident or a business here in the community. Number one, with natural gas prices so low, it's just much less cost effective to upgrade heating and hot water systems. For the resident, it becomes less of a win-win kind of proposition. It's more cost effective to switch from a gasoline-powered car to an electric car. And I have some numbers to show you based on our homes in Benicia. And solar can be a wonderful way to cap electricity costs. Again, it makes some sense for some consumers. And overall in energy efficiency, we're finding that in this climate, if we offer a business or a consumer the opportunity to retire a perfectly functioning piece of equipment for the next one, and we say, this one will save energy, people are very reluctant to do it. It's partly the economics, and we're just coming out of a recession, and the recession has still got a grip on a lot of people. But it's partly just the divergence of interest, there's less interest in being green, so people are unwilling to spend that money simply to be green. So if I offer a consumer a rebate on a refrigerator and they see that their refrigerator is working fine, they're much less likely to say, I'll get that better energy efficient one. They'll say, I'll wait till mine wears out and I'll consider it at that time. Next slide. So when we look across the three sectors, I wanted to address the industrial energy efficiency opportunities first because it's such a straight arrow. And I'd like to point to an example, which is the Energy Trust of Oregon. In Oregon, they fund energy efficiency through something known as a systems benefit charge, which is about a 3% tax on all utility bills. And then that money goes collectively to a few things. One of them is this nonprofit, the Energy Trust. The Energy Trust is mandate is to reduce energy use. So it's not the utility, it's a nonprofit funded through utility collected funds. For the industrial sector, they've had great success, and their model is shown here on the slide. They bring in subsidized technical resources to say, to a lumber mill, for example, let's look at your processes, let's make you world-class in those processes, and by the time we're done, you'll be saving energy as well. They're subsidizing the professional expertise, then they're subsidizing the changeover with cash to make everything cash flow positive, and they're very focused on that bottom line for the company, and they offer incentives to do things. They handhold the industrial customer through the entire process, and they step by step push through the barriers of resistance to change. They've had quite a few successes. The other two places I would point you to as an example are Efficiency Vermont, which is a very similar model for the state of Vermont, and then NYSERDA, which is the New York Industrial Program. Both of them have really good track records using similar ideas around this is how you bring down energy use in wastewater treatment plants, in petroleum refining, in lumber processing, pulp and paper mills, the whole gamut. For the residential sector, I think the winning strategies are these four: behavior change, replacing things with more energy efficient products at the end of service life, solar, and the solar electric car. One question I was asked to address is how to help low-income households, and I have some ideas there. So quick, what's going on with the Benicia Home Efficiency Program? Next slide. Here's some results, and we have a report available through the Sustainability Commission, and Gina will also have it tomorrow, that has an enormous amount of data. This program is achieving 9% energy savings on average for the homes that participate. And the way we got that result is by comparing the homes that participated, and we have for some of them a year and some of them more of energy bills, so it's their real bills. And we compared that to what's going on in the Benicia as a whole. We've had 200 some homes participate in the program. We compare them to Benicia as a whole. We find that when weather caused everybody to go up, these homes went up less. And on many occasions, they actually just saved. So we're getting 9% average savings. The other stellar fact is that almost all the homes we visit, more than 65%, are saving, and they're saving month after month. So there's something about this home visit that we provide that's really causing people to change their behavior, and they're finding it easy to adopt it. When people save, when they're part of that 65%, they're actually saving 15% off their energy bill. I think it's about $140 a year. When we compare this program to other programs offered around the country, these are benchmarks provided by EPA, we find that the Benicia Home Efficiency Program provides 80% more savings per program dollar and is 1/4 of the cost per home served than comparable programs. It's really efficient. So why is it so cost effective? Because we're focused on behavior instead of home upgrades. Now there is a concern that behavior doesn't stick, that people lapse into their wayward ways. We'll come back with some ideas and try and work them into our program to make them more persistent. But thus far, it's working well. With the behavior change program, we find that we get savings in all homes. It's big, small, number of occupants doesn't matter, and that even the high-using homes and the green, low-using homes find savings opportunities. The Benicia High School students have been working with us and doing an indoor water audit. The program average is 8% water savings. We'll be working with the city to calibrate that data against the city as a whole in the same way we did the energy data, and have more results for you shortly. So that's a behavior change program. And before I leave this slide, we wrote a paper, and it was about this program, a very data-filled paper. It was accepted by the American Council for the Energy Efficient Economy, which is a national organization that looks at programs like this. It will be presented in their summer program this summer. When I spoke to their research director about 3 weeks ago about this program, the words coming out of his mouth were, wow, cutting edge, and you guys are doing something that's about the future. A lot more people are going to be doing this. So congratulations to this town. As we move on from behavior change to changing product life, I'm not sure it's showing up here, but on the left-hand side, I did a tour of all the home appliance stores in my area, all 4 or 5 different kinds, and wanted to show with this photograph, it's really confusing to buy an energy-efficient washing machine. I mean, I know what I'm looking for, and I couldn't find the information I needed to say, this guy, not that guy. On the right, there's a bar chart that shows the importance of getting this straightened out. So we've got different kinds of purchases along the bottom, washing machines, fridge, room air conditioner, and then 3 kinds of light bulbs on the right-hand side. And the red bar is, over the life of the product, how much of your spending goes into energy, and the blue is how much is the upfront cost. So the worst is the air conditioner, where 1/12 of the total life cycle cost is the upfront part, and the 11 out of the 12 pieces are the ongoing energy use year after year. So if you make the wrong decision, you're really wasting a lot of money, right? For refrigerators, it's about 1/4 is in the upfront and 3/4 is yet to come as you spend on energy over time. So this is why it's really important, if we can get life cycle costs in front of consumers, we can tip their decisions. When they see this information, they get it. We can tip their decisions to buy more efficient products at the time they're replacing it anyhow, because they know their washing machine just died. That's when their ears are open to this message. Here's some numerical examples. On the left-hand side, we have a washing machine, a standard washing machine, $480, and I did the electric cost, the natural gas cost for the hot water, to heat the water that goes into the machine, and the total life cycle cost is $16,000. When you work on the right-hand side, you bought the higher cost one up front. It's $790, not $480. But you save so much on the energy. And by the way, you get this $125 rebate back from PG&E. Net on net, it's a little under $5,000. So 16,000 life cycle versus 5,000 life cycle. That's the kind of savings we're talking about for a typical consumer in Benicia. Next slide. These are the local numbers. So when we do the home visits, we often sit down at the first moment and talk to people about their energy bill. And this is a picture of PG&E rates. They start low, and then the more energy you use, the more you pay per kilowatt hour. This is electricity only. The fourth and fifth column, the orange and the red, are the two highest tiers. Until recently, PG&E had 5 tiers, and then they brought the 2 back down. So we really only have 4, but legally it's called 5. So that's why our diagram looks like this. So I mentioned we've been in over 200 Benicia homes. 48% of them, nearly half, are in the yellow and the orange and the red areas, meaning they're spending quite a bit for their extra, their marginal, their incremental use of electricity. And to just kind of put a marker down, I drew a blue line across all these tiers. If you went out from a local company or from a company from out of town and said, I want solar and I don't want to pay upfront costs, I'm just going to lease it. That's a common offer now, a solar lease. That blue line represents the cost you're going to pay over the lifetime of that system for a solar lease. So everybody, about half the people in Benicia, would benefit from a solar lease. They could just cut off that area above the blue line. And I have an example for you, of course. What I did was look at a solar lease and an electric vehicle. So first we have the electricity cost. If you went from before on the left to after on the right, it's $150. This would be a customer in Benicia in the yellow bar. Next slide, please. Thanks. This is be a customer in the yellow area, in one of those high-cost areas. So they're spending $150 a month on electricity. After the solar lease, they'd be spending $109. But of course, they have to pay for the lease, and that's why you see the $75 line on the right-hand side. But in addition, I gave this family an electric car. So they're just not buying as much gasoline. They still have to buy a little bit, but this was an electric plug-in hybrid. But they're putting all the electricity used to charge the car onto the solar lease so that it's at that blue line level. And you can see when you put the package together, on the left-hand side, the monthly cost is $300 per month, and it goes down. Solar plus electric car goes down to $222. Now, this does not include the purchase cost of the car. If you buy an electric car in California, and it also applies to plug-in electric hybrids, you get $7,500 tax credit federally and $2,500 locally, so it adds up to $10,000 on the purchase price. Net on net, these numbers can work out with a little adjustment, including the upfront costs. And I know someone's going to ask me this. Today in the New York Times, there was an article about electric cars, and it talked about the various paybacks. And they did not include those tax credits, so I think their paybacks are a little bit off. But these are Benicia numbers. All the calculations that I did for this are available on the Watts On site to anybody here or to any resident. We have tools that show rates by zip code, how much you drive, what your miles per gallon are. You can pick out your exact car and then pick out your what if, or we call it what if, since we're Watts On, your next one. These are a suite of tools that are free that we developed to support a PBS show that's coming up on April 22nd. So there's all sorts of things there for that, like this. And what works with low-income households, including the residential section? When you look at communities and people have studied, well, why are some neighborhoods or so on sort of chronically in an economically challenged environment? Why do some people fail to get on the escalator to the American dream? It turns out to be education and language barriers. We've been doing work in a low-income neighborhood in San Jose, and we're finding that to be true about energy as well. So first of all, in this neighborhood, we've found that the residents are connected to the web, but they don't use email. So, for example, on the PG&E website, to register for online billing, you have to have an email. They do not have an email account. So there's a barrier there that's really small, but it is the barrier. So we're switching over to smartphones and texting as a way to communicate. We do have language specialists. We found that it's really important that we have language specialists that breaks down barriers. We greet them we do neighborhood canvassing door to door, and we try and use community leaders to help open those doors or to teach us how to approach the neighborhood. So there's a lot of care in the outreach program that helps us present a product of energy savings in context to this language, this community, and so on. And finally, I want to note that while for middle-income Americans, energy costs are about 4% of after-tax income, in economically challenged areas, it's typically 9 to 25%. So if behavior change can immediately open the door to savings, it can have a huge impact on households' income. So it's very worthwhile to try and address these cultural and language nuances to open the door. Excuse me, moving on to small commercial. Small commercial is quite challenging because it's very hard to benchmark. Like, what is a low energy bill for a commercial establishment, this restaurant versus another? EPA and DOE do keep benchmark databases, but the square footage that's a minimum in that database is about 50,000 square feet. Many small commercial businesses are typically 5,000, 10,000. So we don't have good data. Also, there's a lot of mismetering in the small commercial sector as buildings are remodeled, and as some units are shared, like heating and cooling units could be shared across units, and then individual offices metered. So it's hard to get immediately accurate data. You've got a landlord and you've got a tenant. Who's paying the bill? Who wants to do the remodel? What does the new lease say? It's a complicated environment for that reason. So small commercial is often called the hard-to-reach market. We were asked to think about this for the Benicia Industrial Park and other small businesses in Benicia, and so our solution is our best thoughts, and this is this pilot program that was recently approved by City Council, which will be mounting, excuse me, we had our kickoff meeting this week, in fact. So in this pilot project, we will be hopefully surveying up to 200 of the 650 businesses in the city of Benicia to ask them about their energy bills, their concerns, and make sure that we're mounting a program going forward that fits their needs. 50 businesses will get free bill analysis. Are you high? Are you low? Is something going on? Also get a site walkthrough through this program. And we're hoping to bring together a collection of building owners and tenants in 2 sites to actually do a retrofit with our subcontractor partner, Carbon Lighthouse. And that way we can demonstrate to other businesses this is a low-cost, cost-effective way to increase your cash flow by saving energy. Very cash flow focused. That's what it takes to get the small business attention. Next slide, please. And what can renters do was a question that I was asked to answer. Lighting and electronics are the 2 things that most renters can do without landlord permission that can provide energy savings. So with lightings, it can be the change in the ballast and the switch from one kind of fluorescent bulb to another can drop your energy use significantly for the lighting function. Scheduling on lighting is often the way to save that really brings in savings immediately. With electronics, we do walkthroughs and we find so much is always on. So finding ways to turn it off without the business when we're not open. Our partner Carbon Lighthouse has found many cases in restaurants where a heating tray is heating up a back kitchen and it should be just moved over and put under the venting unit where the heat will be drawn up and drawn out of the kitchen. It's these small things like that that are appropriately vented in a restaurant that can save energy. So there's lots of things of that nature. And of course, what you can do depends on the lease. Next slide. But I wanted to bring your attention to an opportunity to save in municipal buildings, which are essentially the size of small commercial. So this is a poster from a program we're running with the city of San Jose. The program's called Green Energy Match. And this is the Willow Glen Public Library. We did a walkthrough just as we would do for small commercial. And honestly, we showed the librarians, these are the 10 things you can do to save energy. And those are recorded on the right-hand side of this poster down by the green, red, and purple bars. The librarians have just been gung-ho, and they've done everything we've asked, and they're now saving 20% per month. And we have this same result in 5 other buildings in the city of San Jose, libraries and community centers. We've made a poster, and this is what the template for it. It's on a very large poster board, and we put it in the lobby of those buildings so that the librarians can show the residents of the city we're doing our part to save energy and keep city budget costs down. And then next to it, we have an invitation to join the residential program. So we think there's an opportunity for both small commercial, municipal, and residential to come together with these moments of outreach. Next slide. And my last piece of economic information is what is the importance of energy savings to a community? And I've talked about the change in energy prices, which actually makes energy savings a little bit less advantageous to the individual consumer if you're just looking at the home. If you look at gasoline, of course, there's some great opportunities. But it doesn't account for the fact that when you save energy, it's as if you got a raise as a person. Or if you save energy, it's as if your profits went up as a small business. As an economist, if we look at how people spend money when they get that increase, you know, what if someone gave you a $100 a month increase in income? What would you do with it? Well, the data says that you spend a large amount of that in local retail. And then that creates jobs that if there's enough spending, and that creates more, you know, so on and so on. There's a multiplier effect. And in California, the data is that $1 of energy savings from small businesses or residential translates into $1.40 to $1.80 of retail spending. This is under if everybody spent going forward as they had done in the past. Now, the difference between $1.40 and $1.80 is how much is spent inside the city limits. So for San Jose, which has a really large footprint, you're less likely to drive outside the limits to spend, so that's $1.80. I think here, because people do quite a bit of their spending outside the city, it's going to be on the low side. But my point is that saving energy can be a source of economic vitality for the community, and that there are opportunities to do immediate savings through behavior change. Next slide, and this is my last one. Putting it all on one page, we're talking about technical resources provided for the industrial projects, behavior programs in the residential. Consider adding solar and solar electric vehicles. The Benicia Business Energy Saving Pilot, this acronym here, let's learn from that for small commercial. Consider including community buildings in a behavior change program, and align energy savings with the economic benefit that it brings the community. And last slide. So I'd love to take your questions. I see them arriving as I speak. And I just wanted to conclude with all the tools on What's On are free. They're open to everybody. We do have a Benicia group. And our tools are being featured on a PBS special. Talk about adults, because I cannot miss this opportunity. So K through 3, you know, I said this to someone else today. We've had the opportunity to work with many ethnic groups and immigrant groups in the city of San Jose, because it's a city with an ethnic majority of nobody. It's everybody's there. And I tell you that families that have immigrated to the U.S., and this would be, you know, 1/3 of Silicon Valley are immigrants, bring excellent energy saving habits with them. Their bills are low. And when we do home visits, we find very few savings opportunities. So when I think about those groups and what they've brought, I wish American families had the same thing. We're all Americans, but I wish those of us that got wasteful while growing up could learn from that. So it's the constant, let's turn off the lights, let's live a little bit more simply. They don't have tons of refrigerators. The 3rd and 4th refrigerator is not there, things like that. So I think if we could all adopt those habits, it would be great. And for the adults, the #1 thing you can do to save energy across your whole footprint is buy a high miles per gallon car. That is the single purchase decision that will drop your energy use.
That might lead to another question that I have, and it says, would there still be a net reduction in energy costs if you got an electric car but did not also go solar? Could there actually be an increase in energy costs?
You know, I have never worked out the numbers if there would be an increase in energy costs, so I'm not sure. But the problem is if you get an electric car, you're moving up into the 4th tier of the PG&E rates, which is about 33 cents per kilowatt hour. And as a basis of comparison, the bottom 2 are 12 and 14. So you're paying more than twice as much for every incremental bit of energy to power that car. And that's why going solar makes sense, because it's running, I just mentioned 33 and 12 to 14. Solar's running at about 16 to 17 cents per kilowatt hour. So you can see that it really caps the cost.
This one goes a little bit in a different direction. It says, how would you explain the popularity of the pie-in-the-sky oxymoron, clean coal?
Well, you know, I think we've all had hopes that, that an entrenched industry like coal could be made cleaner. And, you know, DOE has funded a project for this, and the coal companies participated, the utility companies participated, and they all pulled out like 4 years ago because the costs of clean coal were too high. This was the on-site capture. And MIT and other places have come out with startups that put sort of algae on the roofs of coal-fired plants, and the algae grows by absorbing the carbon dioxide emitted as you burn coal. And the problem is they've just never been able to grow these into companies for various technical reasons, such as the algae just collapses and dies because it's overfed by too much carbon dioxide. So there's been challenges to get to clean coal, but as I said in the beginning, coal mines are going to be closing, and that's a real human cost. And so I think, to my mind, we've tried to make clean coal, but we also have to realize it's a wrenching change to move away from it as relative prices change.
The next question is, are hot water recirculating plumbing systems placed in homes where the water heater is remote from the point of use, a net dollar savers? And he makes the comment, I can see possible losses even through an insulated pipe route, even though an insulated pipe route are high, even though, okay, plus the installation cost up front may be approaching the energy savings.
Yeah, so let's describe the problem we're trying to solve in that question.
Yes.
Which is, I want a shower in the master bedroom. My hot water heater's in the garage. And my God, that's that's end to end of my house. And so it takes a long time for the cold water to get out of the pipe and run through the shower until the hot water is drawn through. And so people have two concerns. I'm wasting energy and I'm wasting water. And one technology solution is to actually change this one-way pipe into a round trip, add a little bit more piping, and insulate all of it so when hot water comes, it's not cold when it comes out. And you just circulate the water and recirculate it. So when water's sort of warm but not quite enough, it's not released, it just circles back and gets reheated by your water heater. So this is called a recirculation pump. And it's actually a function of this long run in a house, which is essentially bad construction. And California is just full of all these things where the way we construct our houses is not appropriate to save energy. So if a recirculation pump is running 24/7, I can guarantee you that sitting here, I can look at your electricity bill and I can see that. It raises people's bills, and it goes up into those third and fourth tiers. So it's very costly to run this pump all the time. Now there's two solutions. One is to have an on-off switch at the master bedroom, where you're just running it for like 5 minutes in the morning, and then you take your shower, and then you flip it off. That works great. And the other solution is to put it on a timer where it comes on at 10 to 7 and goes off at 10 after 7. Both of those are pretty low-tech fixes if a recirculation pump is already installed. If you have not yet installed a recirculation pump, the cost-benefit analysis is correct that the person wrote on the card. It will not save you water and energy monetarily. It will save the units, but it won't save the money.
One last question. How would you explain the impending start of a new ridge shaving, open clear mining, one major project in Appalachia?
I'm not really qualified to talk about that.
Okay. With that, I want to thank Martha. I'm sure there'll be more questions. I do have some others. I just need a little bit more explanation on the questions so I can read it. And so when we get later in the program, perhaps I can ask the additional questions. Our next speaker is Armand Navarro. Mr. Navarro has over 25 years of professional experience in the fields of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and green building. He is currently a community energy manager for PG&E, providing climate planning technical assistance to local communities. While at PG&E, Armando has also held the position of account executive and focused on large commercial accounts. In this position, he's provided energy efficiency technical assistance to business owners, managers, and design construction professionals. Mr. Navarro, while at Sonoma State University, was a program director and core faculty member of the SSU Green Building Professionals Certification Program, one of the leading green building education programs in California. He also served as the assistant director of the Environmental Technology Center, a regional model for green building design and construction. He has served as the co-chair of the Redwood Empire chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council. He has also been a technical consultant to several cities in Marin and Sonoma counties on the development and implementation of green building policies. Please join me in welcoming Armando Navarro.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully I will provide you some information that will be useful and applicable. But I wanted to first start off telling you a little bit. You probably all know, who PG&E is in terms of, your very direct service that you receive. But I wanted to show you that, PG&E serves over 15 million customers, over 70,000 square miles of service territory. So it's a very diverse geography encompassing all kinds of climate zones. So that's really important to note, in that a lot of the programs that we offer in a variety of different settings. And of course, PG&E is a regulated investor-owned utility company. PG&E has also received a number of awards for being a leading utility in a lot of different areas that are defined as green. From its power mix, as you'll see in a little bit, to some of the programs that we offer as well. Next slide. So the PG&E power mix is the cleanest in California, and it's definitely one of the cleanest in the country as far as the composition from large hydro, renewables, the use of natural gas, and so forth. And you've heard a lot of the benefits of natural gas. Very little of the direct generation of electricity from PG&E is coming from coal. So that's part of what really helps to really clean up that mix. As far as the renewable portfolio, that's something that right now is at about 16%, but it is slated to hit 33% by 2020 under a CPUC ruling that has mandated that all utilities have a portfolio that hits 33% renewable. So basically what's going to be happening over that time is that PG&E's mix will get cleaner and cleaner from an environmental or a climate or greenhouse gas perspective. Next slide. It's not showing the graphic there for some reason. Sorry about that. Well, what you would see there on the graphic is that over the last 30 years, that PG&E has had energy efficiency programs, and it's been that long. And I actually worked on some of the very early programs that we had at PG&E doing residential energy audits. So kind of from the ground up, I had an opportunity to start from residential, small commercial to large commercial. But energy efficiency programs have been incredibly successful in California. And what this graph shows you is that basically the per capita energy use in California, even though the population has grown, has remained fairly flat. And it's really, in a lot of ways, a model across the country, and it compares favorably with a lot of European countries that have had much more of a cultural as well as social policy focus on reducing energy use. Next slide. So what has been the result? And I'll highlight a couple of things that I think are really important as far as the effectiveness of energy efficiency programs. all the different incentives and rebates that PG&E has provided through the programs have saved customers over $24 billion. So it's a sizable amount of money. And you heard a little bit about in terms of what happens when a dollar gets saved. There is a compounding effect at the local level and obviously at the regional and statewide level as well. So that's money that's been made available for other economic pursuits. So I think that's an important result of energy efficiency. The other factor is from an environmental standpoint, that energy saved is about equivalent to taking 15 million cars off the road. So energy efficiency, it's been my professional life, for quite a number of years, and so and part of the reason is that I'm very convinced that that is really, what we need to focus on as far as really, solving, a part of our energy picture. Next slide. Now, what we're seeing is a lot of focus on energy efficiency, renewables for a variety of different reasons. There is a whole set of policies that have come into being here in the last 10, 15 years that are basically saying, well, we need to take a look and solve the way that we use electricity, the way we use gas, the way we produce electricity, and so forth. And one of the key ones that was a real landmark piece of legislation was AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act, which you'll often hear referred to as, oh yeah, we're trying to meet the AB 32 mandates. And a lot of cities have lined up in terms of trying to meet some of the goals that are in that legislation, short of having a national energy policy. So part of what we're seeing in California and in local communities is the fact that unlike some European countries where they have a national energy policy that really has some of these dictates, we're doing it at the state and local levels. So I think that's important to know. Next slide. But one of the things that's really important to note is what's the future going to be in California, and what's kind of our bullseye? What's our target that we've set out there in the future? And the term that's being used is zero net energy buildings. And the former speaker really described that quite well in terms of some of the strategies that we can start to take to really move in that direction. And in very, very basic form is that residential buildings by the year 2020, all new construction and all energy programs will be tied to achieving zero net energy buildings, which are buildings that generate as much energy on site as they use. That's the basic definition. There's some complexity and nuance to that, but that in essence is what it is. So residential buildings by 2020 will be zero net energy. Commercial buildings by 2030. Why? Because as you'll see, commercial buildings are a little bit more complex, and also the former speaker talked about some of the challenges, particularly in the small to medium market for commercial buildings. Next slide. So the PG&E customers are, of course, across the board. We have residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural customers. And in some parts, some of the rural areas of Napa and Sonoma and the northern part of the state, agricultural energy use is actually fairly sizable. So it is something that we have a whole host of programs. I won't be talking about those today because they're really not applicable to the city of Benicia. Next slide. Yeah, I was afraid it might not show up, very well on the screen. But what I did is I got information that shows what is the breakdown for residential. And really what you're looking at is the fact that, some of the traditional things that you would expect from an electricity use are showing up. But really one of the things that's really important, and it's really been growing, is the whole area that's, I've heard it referred to as plug loads. So that's all the different small electronics and appliances, televisions, including televisions and so forth. And that's really been growing. That's the one area of energy use that's really been growing, and it's been growing substantially. As an example, some of the early flat panel TVs consumed a substantial amount of energy to the point where it really necessitated, having standards set so that they weren't as consumptive of electricity. And what we're also seeing is that most families now have 2, 3, 4 television sets. So that's part of where that slice, that yellow slice at the bottom, that's really what's impacting in the area that's had probably the greatest amount of growth. One of the areas that we've seen decrease is refrigeration. Refrigerators in the last 20 years have gotten incredibly energy efficient. And you can take a look at them, and now it's a matter of a few dollars a year difference between, the models. And so sometimes, it's not the overriding reason why people get it, unless, of course, you're getting a sub-zero, refrigerator, that, it's really intended for commercial kitchens, but people are putting them in their homes. So we're seeing that also in the larger homes. From a gas perspective, gas use perspective in residences, the three main things are going to be space heating, water heating, and cooking. That's really kind of still continues to be, and there isn't any change to that. Next slide. There are a whole variety of resources on the PG&E website, and I know that it can be difficult to navigate sometimes, and we have been working here in the last year to try to make that a little bit more accessible. We've created a front end called My Energy, where you're able to go in and basically identify or see your energy use and help you identify through a variety of resources things that you might be able to, actions that you may be able to take that are specific or are reflected from your energy use. It's not as detailed as the resources that are being provided by Watson. I'm sorry. Yeah, Watson. Thank you. But I think that it starts to steer you in the right direction. You're fortunate in Benicia, you have a much more in-depth ability or a much more in-depth analysis and the ability to then make even better choices. But system-wide, we are providing, I think, a good resource. Next slide. There are a variety of energy-saving programs, including incentives and rebates. I wanted to point to one program that's fairly new on the horizon in the state, and that's the Energy Upgrade California program. And what that does is basically focus on taking a look at the house as a whole system. And because of advances in terms of analysis, energy audits that are being able to be done at homes, we're able to identify and really pinpoint more accurately what things people need to do. And I think that's been a real advance. Like I said, when I first started and we were doing energy audits, it was really very general information. Now we have the ability to test the house, see how it performs right now. Then you model the changes that would be done to that and see what the projected results could be. And then you actually can come back and test after the improvements have been made to see if you achieve that. The PG&E incentives are based on that differential. So it's really based on actual scientific testing of the house. And I think that's an important advancement because you want to feel like you're getting what you paid for. And this is, I think, a really valuable program. Again, you have the ability here in the city of Benicia to go, in that same direction through the very local programs that the city is offering. So I encourage you to take advantage of those because that's really what you need. You need to have information that's reflective about your energy use and disaggregates your bill or takes apart your bill to be able to tell you which appliances are the ones that are causing your particular home to have the cost that it has. Next slide. I'm having the same problem as I made my slides too small here. So there's a variety of different rebates and incentives, as I mentioned, across the board, starting with major appliances and some of the basic things like insulation or some of the cool roofing products and so forth. So there are rebates available in all these areas. And when you go to My Energy, you'll have a variety of choices there. And this will be one of them. You can see rebates and incentives. And then you can drill down to the very specific one that you're most interested in if you've already identified what that is. Next slide. One of the great nifty tools that are on there is individual calculators for individual appliances. So you can actually put in how old your refrigerator is, what size it is, and that you're planning to purchase, what level or what type of refrigerator you're planning to purchase, and it will actually give you a calculation of what your savings are going to be on an annual basis. So those calculators are really nice because they're tailored for each individual appliance. Again, this is this is more general information, and as I said before, these tools have been devised to take into account the various climate zones that PG&E services. So it's not always as tailored as it could be, and again, you're fortunate to have a much more specific one in your area. So next slide. Now, as far as our income qualified programs, or what are sometimes referred to as low income programs, there is the opportunity for folks who cannot afford to do the improvements to their home to receive both weatherization assistance and also, in some cases, new appliances. So it's actually a fairly comprehensive program. It's been in place for, my gosh, over 20 some odd years. That I know of. I may be getting the timing wrong, but it's been several decades that this program has been in place, and it's based on income. So that's part of the focus of the energy efficiency programs, or one of the things that was essential that the PUC said, we want there to be some equity so that all customers are receiving some benefit from these energy efficiency programs. So this is a result. Is that really, in essence, we're all paying through our utility bills for these programs to be made available. And this particular one, like I said, offers fairly extensive assistance to folks who qualify based on the income. Next slide. Now, I also wanted you to take a look at the commercial side of things. So if we look at all commercial customers across the PG&E service territory, what we're seeing is that a large percentage of their energy use is coming from interior lighting. So that's why you've seen a lot of programs are focused on retrofitting lighting, because it usually has it's the easiest to do, it's got the quickest payback, and if somebody's not interested in doing at least the lighting, then they're very likely not going to be able to, or be interested in changing out their more expensive equipment that has a longer payback. So that's really what we're looking at here with commercial customers. But let's take a look at a subsector of commercial. Next slide. If we take a look at retail, we see that that lighting, interior lighting in retail, actually increases. The amount, the pie, the amount of the pie that's devoted to interior lighting increases with retail. For obvious reasons, is that in retail there's a lot of different, a lot of the retail is focused on lighting and heating and air conditioning, basically. So almost over 44% of the energy pie, or the energy use in a retail establishment, is going to be used by the interior lighting. And then there's a whole host of other things. Now, obviously, within retail, we have restaurants, we have food and beverage stores, which are going to be much more weighed to refrigeration. So that's part of what we do when we go out and visit businesses, is to try to tailor the kinds of programs that we suggest based on the equipment that they have. So, it's just, fairly common knowledge that, like I said, in certain types of retail, it's going to be refrigeration that's going to be your main cost, and that's really where you want to focus your efforts. But always coming back to the fact that lighting is still, one of the best paybacks, and I think that's the important part. There are a variety of different rebates, and I have actually some handouts that I can provide to any of you for both the residential and the commercial, that tells you what is offered in each of those areas or each of those categories. And there's always new programs, and there's also, for the larger businesses, there's calculated incentives. Meaning, if you have something that's very specific to your business, then we can come in and actually do the evaluation, do the audit, and then determine which of the programs or which way it's going to be the most beneficial, whether it's the standard rebate or the calculated rebate. Next slide. So really the focus is kind of 3 steps on the commercial side and on the residential side as well. I'm much more familiar with the commercial side, is that we want to have customers do energy efficiency because those are permanent reductions in usage. Next, we want to lead customers to do some demand response, which are temporary reductions, such as turning down your thermostat, turning down the temperature of your thermostat. That's a temporary, kind of energy-saving action, which is more behavioral. And then there's also self-generation, which has been talked about with solar. So really, those are the 3 steps. And for each customer, it's going to be tailored in terms of what really is a fit. Next slide. So as I mentioned, energy efficiency is a permanent change-out, typically, of equipment. And the idea is to have a piece of equipment that does the same amount of work, but uses less energy. And really, in some cases, it's also the focus that if you can get something that reduces your energy, then it also compounds it by moving you down from those tiers that were mentioned, particularly in the residential sector as well. Next slide. So rebates are ones that have a standard amount. It's $1 per fluorescent tube, or it's $50 per dishwasher, or so forth. So those are considered rebates. As I mentioned, it's across the board. There's a variety of different ones that are available. And then next slide. And then the calculated ones are ones that are much more tailored, and we have the ability to then really select on a more focused basis, what is going to be done. Now, what's important with the calculated is that people have to submit an application prior to changing equipment, which is not the case with the rebates. Rebates, you can go ahead and buy the equipment, install it, save the receipt, and you submit that with the application, and you receive the stated amount. With the calculated one, you really have to have PG&E come onto the site, verify what's in place, and then proceed with your change-out plan. Next. One of the other programs too, and this starts to get into for larger buildings, larger commercial buildings, is retrocommissioning. And the reason that's important is that a lot of equipment is installed, and it may be installed originally as specified by the manufacturer, but over time things change and that equipment is no longer functioning as it's supposed to be. And so it really is a program that has as its focus to reestablish the original settings for that equipment and to maximize the efficiency of that. Next slide. We also have programs, of course, for new construction for both commercial and residential as well. So that's a whole variety of programs that include all types of systems. Oftentimes it's based on the performance of the new construction. Next slide. Next slide. So I talked about demand response, and some of the benefits are in the state of California. On some hot summer days, we reach the maximum generating capacity that we have in the state by the utilities, and so we have to go out into the spot market and buy electricity, which is the most expensive way to buy electricity. And so what you can equate it to the fact that if gasoline stations were able to, at the time that most of us are going to be driving, whatever the peak time is, if the gasoline stations were allowed to raise the price because they knew that people were going to be having a high demand for that time, that's the equivalent to the spot market in electricity, is that part of what we're trying to avoid is that purchasing that highest priced electricity. So that's one of the benefits of demand response, is that if we can get customers to curtail temporarily, then it starts to help the overall system lower its peak and having to bring on those inefficient or more expensive kilowatts. It also helps to maintain system reliability, so it helps to prevent anything like brownouts or even worse, potential blackouts. As the system starts to get strained, that possibility does exist, and it has happened fairly recently in the last 5 years here in the U.S., that some parts of the country have experienced that. And then, of course, one of the other benefits is it reduces greenhouse gas emissions for a variety of different reasons. Doing demand response has a benefit, as does energy efficiency and renewables as well. Next slide. So the final piece of the puzzle, as far as what people can do to manage their energy use, is do self-generation or co-generation. And of course, some of the ones that you're very familiar with is solar and wind. But some businesses, especially larger businesses, are going into microturbines, which is basically buying the gas from PG&E or from a third party and burning it on site to generate their own electricity to meet a certain percentage of their load. Now that's a fairly complex process, and it's something that has to have a fairly detailed financial analysis, because it's not something that lends itself to just the average business or the average residence. Although I'm starting to see that some companies, fuel cell companies, if you're familiar with that technology, are focusing on the residential market and selling units that would be available that are comparable to solar systems in terms of pricing and performance and so forth. So next slide. So with that, that's my formal presentation. My contact information is up there. We do have I'm not based locally, but we do have a local PG&E rep, Alan Laxon, who would be able to provide some assistance if that was needed, but I'm happy to answer or relay any requests that you might have to him. So,
thank you, Mr. Navarro. I do have a number of questions for you. Okay. Just again to sort of put the program in perspective as we proceed. After I ask him some questions, then we'll ask the two speakers to just talk between themselves. While they're doing that, as you have questions, since we will have extra time, if you have questions, please be sure to write them down, and we will continue with the questions for either one or both speakers at the end of their portion of the program. If you would, then, if you have it for just one or the other of them, just mark who you want to answer the question on your card. And so with that, Mr. Navarro, I'll start with what I thought might be a little tough question. Okay. And the speaker says, I'm not quite clear on this, but aren't there disincentives to generating your own energy, solar or wind, because PG&E will assess a charge if more energy is being generated than you need?
That actually has a number of parts, but for the average residential or small business, small medium business, there isn't any particular charge. There actually has now been legislation that was passed and put in place that people who have solar systems who generate excess electricity will now be compensated by PG&E, not at the retail rate like their normal net meter does, but it will be at an average rate that is probably more on the wholesale level. But actually people get compensated for excess generation.
The next question is, what is the status of the smart grid? Couldn't a large portion of California's energy needs be met by widespread decentralized PV systems on rooftops? And what will it take for that to happen?
Yes, I think the smart grid, I think there's the smart meter that you've all been hearing about is part of that, with the idea of providing as much information back to consumers as possible, the ability for third-party companies to develop ways for people to manage their energy use, and we're seeing this with a variety of different folks. The idea was with the smart meter, it can identify, if the customer chooses to turn on that feature, it can identify which appliances are operating at what time, and to be able to really address that appliance to minimize the use. So the smart grid is developing, it's being put in place. As far as decentralized energy, what we'll always know and what we'll always see is that large industry is always going to need more electricity than it's typically going to produce on site. So that's something, and a lot of it has to do with that factor, and also too the fact that there has to be stability in the system, and so a lot of the renewables are fluctuate in terms of their production time. So obviously solar is during the day. So at nighttime you still need electrical generation, and that needs to be supplied in some method of something that is called baseline load. So yes, there can be a balance of decentralized, but there's also a balance between the cost of putting in that decentralized power in comparison to the centralized generation. So it's a question, and it's also an issue that we all need to be looking at, is how much are we willing to pay to basically change the current infrastructure.
Next question is, why is solar such a small part of PG&E's total power generation?
So solar has been coming on and has becoming more cost competitive, and now we're starting to see models that are analyzing the value of solar in some different ways so that will increase. As I mentioned, 33% of the PG&E generation portfolio is slated to be from renewables by 2020, and I think a good portion of that is going to be coming from solar, some type of solar. Most utilities will look at utility scale solar, meaning that they're the larger projects that are basically then transported and then distributed to our customers, and that's typically considered a more effective, efficient, way for the utility to provide the renewables. So that's really what we're focusing on, but there continues to be incentives for the smaller systems as well.
Which brings me to the next question. How would you generalize the savings realized by the distribution system PG&E-wide as we move toward local house or self-generation in replacing power losses from distribution from power source to user?
So I think what maybe the question is alluding to is the fact that if you look at the overall, if you look at a unit of gas being burned at the power plant, and what happens to that once it's burned and then it's converted, transmitted, and then distributed to the home and eventually ends up powering an appliance or so. That's typically considered overall system efficiency, and so there's losses at every point there. And so yes, you would pick up efficiency if you basically are moving it from far away that requires all those steps to be made to directly consuming it at the home and generating it right there. So yes, there will definitely be a number. It's very dependent on the power plant that we're looking at or the type of fuel that's being used, but there is definitely it's definitely more efficient to consume natural gas, let's say to produce electricity on site, than it is to burn it in a distant location and then transmit that electricity.
I next have a question about rebate, and it says, I recently bought an energy efficient washer. There was no additional rebate for Solano County. Could Benicia offer its own rebate through PG&E, and how much lead time would that take?
I've never heard of individual.
Oh yeah, we see it all the time. So Watson has a nationwide database of rebates, and in California, several cities offer city-specific rebates.
Right. No, yes, but I mean in terms of PG&E offering a rebate for a specific city, that really isn't. Yeah.
So I think the ones I'm thinking of are authorized by the city.
By the city
and issued
themselves.
by the city.
Right.
At the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I have a number of other questions, but what I think we'll do now, having answered a number of questions, is just turn it back to the panelists. They've heard some of the questions and some of the issues that you've raised, and then afterwards we'll go back and continue with the questions. There's several of the questions that I've saved because I felt that they might be answered by both of the speakers rather than just the one for whom it was submitted at the time. So So Armando and Martha, why don't you go ahead and begin the discussion?
I would say that, some of the questions that you received from the audience were about essentially how could PG&E have more green power, more renewable power, and you alluded to the utility grade renewables. And I just wanted to point out that they are so much more efficient. Like solar in a single location out in the desert is just so much more efficient than rooftop solar on a residence. And even accounting for the transmission and distribution losses, which are under 10%, it's just way more efficient to have the solar installations out there and bring it into the grid that way. And so what we see over and over in the world of energy is, we all have hearts and minds and we want to be involved, but sometimes the big industrial solution is the most cost-effective solution.
No, I would agree, and that's, I think, why the focus has been, and it's a balancing, it's balancing that equation of continuing to offer people solutions at the local level, and yet focusing on the overall cost, because that's something that people always ask us. So, well, we want you to site solar systems in our county, in our city, and the question always comes up is if we can get, just like you, if we can get land use for 1/10 the price in the Central Valley, and we can put up a solar system there, are people willing to pay that additional cost to have the solar sited right in their county so they can feel like they can see it? It's much more palpable. So that's part of that balancing act that has to happen. And really, something that we have to remember is that the ground rules that the utilities operate by, the investor-owned utilities, are set by the CPUC. So if people in the state of California feel that they want to be able to further a certain policy, that's really kind of the place, because they set the ground rules that the utilities must play by. As a good example, when energy efficiency programs started, which were fairly unique in the country, there was that question about, do we want to pay for this? And the decision was made, in general, by people who were actively involved with the CPUC process, is that yes, we think efficiency is the way we should go, and we want to be, very aggressive with it, and we have been, and we've gotten the results.
Just to put some numbers to what you just said, nationwide about $7 billion a year is spent on energy efficiency for the industrial, residential, and commercial sectors. And California alone accounts for about $1 billion of that each year. We run in 3-year cycles, so $3 billion over 3 years. So 1/7 of the nation's energy efficiency spending is here in this state. And, it's distributed amongst the utilities, with PG&E spending the majority.
I do have a question that I thought might be directed to both of you, and it was a question about energy audits, which you both do. And it says, does one have better information if the energy audits are conducted on both cool winter and warm summer days? I think the question is, when's the best time to do an audit?
When's the best time? Go ahead.
Well, so typically auditors do a couple of tests, but if they also bring a thermal imaging camera, then you might get an additional piece of information by looking at how much does my insulation have gaps. And in order to get that color image and that answer, you have to have a temperature difference between the outside and the inside. So you could have your air conditioner blasting and it'd be hot outside, or vice versa, your heat running and it'd be cold outside. But you can accomplish that temperature gap, we're in a fortunate climate, in the morning. Because no matter what's happening, the mornings are cool. So we found that as long as we can get a cool morning, we can add that bit of information. But it's not standard to the audits for Energy Upgrade California. It's an additional piece of information.
Yeah. One of the challenges that we have in California is that we generally have a fairly mild climate. If you compare some of the things that we're trying to do here to what's already being done back in the Northeast, Minnesota, or, well, that's not in the Northeast, but anyways, you get the idea, where, they're going to be spending, $600-700 in the wintertime for heating their homes. they have no problem with justifying making some of these expenditures. And so one of the challenges that we've always had here in California is because of the mild climate, there doesn't seem to be enough of a value there, or the dollars aren't enough for people to say, yes, we definitely want to do that. I'll share a little experience. Some years back, I worked for a consultant, and I was sent up to do a project up in Seattle. Well, Seattle City Lights is almost 100% hydroelectric from federal projects. And at the time, they were paying about 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And we were coming in and telling business owners, which was a focus of the program, hey, we can save you $10 a month. And they were looking at us like, why am I going to waste my time talking to you? But it's real energy. You know, I guess, you know, I've always been a bit of an energy geek in that way. And it's like, it's still saving energy. Isn't that important to you? And it's like, no, not really. You know, so that's part of the challenge in California is that for both residential and commercial is that, you know, is that we have a mild enough climate. We're not using enough, with the exception of the Central Valley, where cooling costs are substantial. And there you'll see a lot of uptake for the energy upgrade program, or some of the programs like the city of Fresno offered a really excellent program where they did the audits, they did the thermal imaging, but people were paying $600–700 a month for their cooling costs. So they were very interested in figuring out how to reduce that.
So here in Benicia, because I know all this data, the average home spends about $800 a year on natural gas for heating and hot water, and then about $1,200 a year, or a little bit less, on electricity. And we have found many homes in Benicia have central air conditioning installed, but it's used so sparingly by the residents that participate in the home energy program that we can't see the evidence of hot day air conditioner on the bills. I mean, that's how sparingly it's used here.
I have another question. It says, are the benefits of heat retention through insulation and gasketing about the same typically as heat rejection in the summer?
So I'm thinking of two different products here that might help answer that question. So one is, if you have a very hot summer day, your attic will typically heat up to maybe 140 degrees if you have an attic. And so if you can create an air seal and then a layer of insulation, you'll prevent your cooled air from your house from leaking out and getting into that attic, and the cool air will stay in your home. So insulation can help with that. But a second thing you can do that can help you run your air conditioner less is put on a reflective shield on the beams. It's sort of stapled next to it. And it looks like something out of the NASA space program, that light tinfoil. It's a little stronger than that. But what happens is, as the sunlight comes in, the rays go through your roof and they get reflected back out by this barrier. So it's not providing insulation, it's just providing that reflection. So in the summer, if your insulation is there, you'll have it also in the winter, but you can have this reflective barrier. Which one is better and more cost effective, I think, depends on what you already have in your home and if you have a specific hot summer day problem in a certain part of your house.
Yeah, that, you know, I worked for a while with doing the new construction incentives for residential, and one of the things that we were really encouraging builders, even though there was no specific rebate for, is to put radiant barrier sheathing, and it's actually a product that comes together. So whatever it is that they put, you know, down to put the roofing materials on top of, actually comes already bonded with that. So it's not a separate process. It's really something you do at the same time. And we felt like it wasn't so much from the incentive view, but because you could actually get points from green rating systems for having radiant barrier. So I think it's very, very effective in areas where you do have air conditioning needs or have a air conditioning load.
So that question used this word gasketing, and as I'm thinking about it, I think if we called that air sealing, it would be a common phrase used in the world of energy audits. And air sealing is solving this problem, which is your house is leaking. And so it's like wearing a jacket but not zipping it up. And typically people have air leaks in their homes that, you know, are a yard wide if you put them all in one place. So air sealing is going around, often from the attic down or the crawl space up, and with a caulking gun, meticulously circling like recessed lights, plumbing protrusions, and so on, because all those small places add up to where heat rises the house's zipper is open, the heat is leaking. You can be much more comfortable if you can stop that air leak out of the house, put the blanket down, because then the hot air stays in the house and your furnace runs much less.
Yeah, some of my friends make fun of me because I'll watch shows like This Old Home or those kinds of programs, but I think they're really a wonderful way of educating the general public, and they happen to have one on exactly that topic about air sealing and the importance of it, and I love it because it's always a contractor and looks like he's been doing it for 30 years, and it's like, can't get anything new on this guy. He knows it all, and it was a great program, and talking exactly about that and walking in the half hour or hour program, I forget what it was, walking people through and actually showing them all these places and adding them all up and saying, this is why you want to do this process. It's not particularly sexy. It's not like solar where it's very visible and boy, you really feel like you're contributing. And this makes it, I think, as much of a contribution. It's something that you can carry in your back pocket and know that that's your contribution.
I have a number of questions that now are sort of directed at one or the other of you, but if it's okay with the audience, we'll kind of just, I'll ask the question of the person that was asked, and if the other one of you wants to weigh in on the question, I'm sure the comments would be very welcome. So let's start with one for Martha. And it says, CFL prices, the upfront may be misleading, and it has an exclamation point at the end of it. I find that 20+% do not last even 1 year and have even had one Chinese unit separate live from its base. I believe that CFL costs are much higher, both for buy-in and disposal, a hidden cost than usually assumed.
Yeah, so flashing back to a memory I have of going to the National Association of State Energy Officers to their conference, and there was this huge cluster around the coffee and the hot water, which was CFLs nationwide, exactly as that questioner asked. They don't last, and utilities, have been subsidizing them nationwide, and all of the state energy officers were saying, "What are we going to do? This is terrible." So everybody has experienced the sort of unexpected short life of CFL bulbs due to poor quality manufacturing. So I think over time the manufacturing's gotten better. I think utility programs have focused on certain brands, but here in California. You can comment on this further probably, utilities actually don't subsidize CFLs anymore. We're moving on to LEDs. And LEDs, where if you had a 100-watt bulb, a CFL would take it down to essentially the energy of 25 watts. An LED will take it down to the energy of 10 watts. And it lasts, it's manufactured in a way that's more reliable, so it really does last. People have been very happy with LEDs that are now coming out on the market. They are getting to be pretty heavily rebated. I know in Palo Alto there's like a $15 rebate on a $30 LED right now. So switching off of CFL seems to be the answer that I've seen out there.
Yeah, no, and it's correct. PG&E earlier or late last year put in place a CFL recycling program with some major retailers. Why? Because it is important, and it was being minimized, the fact that we need to make sure that we collect and dispose of those properly, because they do contain mercury, and that's an important thing. I think it's a little scary sometimes when you watch the video. It's kind of like one of those horror movies, as they said, wear the mask, the gloves, make sure you have your full hazmat suit on, and yes, it's mercury, and it's not something that we want to have in our bodies or in the environment. And yes, I think we're trying to address that at PG&E by having these recycling programs so that we're taking back all those CFLs that we've been encouraging people to buy. And yes, absolutely, there has been a problem with the consistency of the quality, and that's one of the reasons that we've gone really slowly into the whole LED market, because we know that that's the future. That is the direction that probably most lighting is going to go. When we see the first manufacturer that really comes out with that 4-foot replacement for a 4-foot fluorescent unit, that'll be the first billionaire from lighting that you'll see, because they're so pervasive and they would make such an impact overall in terms of energy use and then potentially also the length of the lamp and more reliability. But nobody's kind of broken that barrier yet. PG&E did a lot of work with encouraging streetlight conversions, and we actually pushed. There was no national standard, and we kept pushing and pushing, and we were actually having manufacturers submit their data to PG&E. And I got to tell you, some of it was so shoddy that it didn't meet even minimum thresholds for UL listing, and yet they wanted to sell these products to customers. And so, yes, there has to be, I think, a more conservative approach sometimes with adopting these technologies to make sure we know what the drawbacks are. But LEDs are definitely the future for a variety of reasons, some of them that I mentioned. And once we get the manufacturing down, I think the cost will come down substantially. We saw that already with streetlights. From where we started 3 years ago to where we are now in terms of the cost of streetlights, I would say it was probably half the cost.
The next question is for Armando, and actually three. It's just generally about PG&E programs. And the first one says, what's the future of the EUC program? The second one says, do you think the whole house rebates will continue to beyond 2012? And the third one is the retro commissioning program active? PG&E website says it's suspended.
Okay. So the first two will be easier in that they're one and the same. It's the Energy Upgrade California and the Whole House program, or the Whole House incentive from PG&E. It's really at the core of Energy Upgrade California. So the Energy Upgrade California is really an outreach, marketing, information type of program, and it's creating awareness for the public about doing this whole house approach. And then PG&E pays the incentive based on the performance or the actual savings accomplished. And that is slated to continue. It's one of those things that I mentioned to you. There was, for a long time, there wasn't the focus on a lot of really deep energy retrofits for residential. Why? Because they're much more expensive to implement. So every kilowatt hour that comes from residential is much more expensive than coming from commercial. And that was part of that balancing of the portfolio, is we wanted to, the PUC wanted to see that there was good cost effectiveness, and so residential programs were not passing, the test, to a certain degree. But the decision was made to refocus back on residential and to really provide residential customers more opportunity. So as far as I know, they will continue on to the next portfolio, which will be through 2014. So I'm confident of that. On the retro commissioning, yes, it has gone through some cycles of opening and closing, and I think at this point they may have run out of funds, but they were evaluating reopening it within a month or so, because it's a very effective program, and it's really a good way of working with large industrial or large commercial customers to kind of reestablish their best operating practices.
Next, question from Martha. And this says, Martha, I start to steam between the ears when I consider the solar sites in the desert. Number one, the builder's construction may use 300% of collection area or more for access and clearing of the site. Two, there have been no good environmental impact report for a California desert site yet, because we just do not have the biotic species data in desert areas. Just because our deserts are understudied, underreported, then after the mess is made, we still have distribution costs.
I think that's a very fair point. And when I was talking about the utility grade systems, I mentioned the word energy. It is a more efficient way to produce energy, and I did not speak about any of these other attributes. So I mentioned that we did this work for this PBS show that's coming up. Part of what we did was look at the diet. And I learned something really important. We were asked to say, how much energy does it take to produce the food we eat every day? And how could we change our diet to reduce that amount of energy? And one of my answers was, beef doesn't matter. And the producers got very upset at me. They're like, how could you say that not eating beef is, doesn't matter for your energy footprint? Well, it turns out that as a meat processing industry, we're really efficient. But cows, in addition to, just whatever else they do, they digest in all sorts of ways, and that creates emissions. And so if you want to minimize carbon and all those other greenhouse gases, you should not eat beef. If you want to minimize energy, eating beef is not your first choice. And that's a story that reminds me that the report card, what's our goal and how do we measure up against it, is actually very narrow. So I keep talking about saving energy, but I don't have a report card to talk about environmental issues. And as you're right, the deserts are understudied. It also comes up with Arctic oil and with tar sands and fracking, other sources of our new energy supply. What is that report card? And people like me try and stay out of trouble by speaking very narrowly just about energy.
Yeah, no, it is a challenge. Sometimes, new technologies get embraced. I know that there was a period of time there where wind was really, really in the crosshairs of a lot of folks who were very concerned, and rightly so, about the bird death counts. And there was a lot of studies that was done that was basically able to bring the science to bear that says, hey, we need to take a look at this. As yes, it has the energy benefits, but can we minimize this other impact? And one of them was, well, some of it was fairly simple. Some of it was, let's do an overlay of the riparian flyways over any places that are being considered as wind farms, and then we'll know whether we're building right in the middle of those flyways. So, that was, something that the industry hadn't considered. And then the other thing was the design of the towers. So some towers actually encourage birds of prey to nest on them because they were this open lattice and they provided just the ideal viewing site for them to do hunting. And so that was, changed over. And so what you see, the majority of the new wind machines are the solid, tube ones for primarily that reason. There's some other ones now, but that was one of the effects that was had. So yes, additional scientific information in terms of renewables. Sometimes the industry leaps up ahead of some of the information that should be helpful.
This is a question for both of you. Do you see state regulations continuing to incent energy efficiency or relying more on the market to drive energy efficient installations in future years? Question really is, how long will rebates continue?
I think that rebates are one of the policy levers that states use. California also has appliance efficiency standards. So sometimes at the federal level, we haven't maintained the standards, they've been lapsed, and California standards have continued on. There's a lot of evidence to show that these other policy mechanisms really work as well. Coming up are all the tighter building codes. We have Title 24, we're going to green points and other types of building codes that are even tighter. So these types of policies are very effective in tipping and nudging consumer decisions. I think California at the PUC level is very hungry for new business models. I mean, our company is one of them. Today I was speaking with someone who's advocating on-bill repayment, which means if you take out a loan for energy efficiency, it's attached to your electricity bill, and you pay it off at rates of $20 or $30 a month for the next 15 years. You happen to move, it stays with that electricity bill because that person is going to enjoy the benefits of it. So I think that they're working with the PUC and evaluating this program. So I feel like the PUC is hungering for new business models that can complement their agenda, and it goes well beyond rebates.
Yeah, and I think the PUC has already indicated to the utilities that they would really like to see more financing options for consumers, both residential and commercial customers. We currently have, I think, a pretty good on-bill financing program. It's zero interest, and it's offered to municipal customers and commercial customers. It has not reached the residential customer level for a variety of reasons. One is that it's a much more expensive loan to handle when it's small, and so I think that's been kind of a little bit of an obstacle. But I think there are people, who are obviously working on this, and I know PG&E, last I heard, was bringing someone who's coming from the financial industry to help run the unbilled financing or the financing options, because they see that it's going to be something that will increase. Is that if we want more adoption of energy efficiency, we need to get rid of some of the obstacles, and one of them is the upfront cost.
The next question is for Armando, and it says, if PG&E has to go 33% renewable, do you see nuclear power construction at all in the next 20 years? And Martha may have a comment on that too, since I remember that discussion in her slides.
I'm not at the upper echelons of PG&E, but I haven't heard anything from PG&E in terms of building any new nuclear power plants. I think the focus has been on meeting the portfolio standard for renewables, and then also on making the natural gas plants more efficient, and that's really been the focus, and energy efficiency, of course, to continue to to manage that gap or that increase demand.
The state has a loading order policy, which is as new supplies come across, it should be energy efficiency first, then renewables, then like natural gas or other low carbon intense options, and including the contracts where some of the energy we use here in California is generated, electricity is generated like in the Four Corners region. Even those contracts have to be negotiated to this loading order. So I don't think nuclear is on the radar of that loading order at all.
The next question is for Martha, and it says, has Watts On done any recent analysis to determine the effect of high gas prices on the cost effectiveness of purchasing an electric vehicle without installing solar? In other words, do you know the cost per mile traveled for gasoline-powered cars versus electric vehicles?
Why don't you ask the next question? I'll do a little bit of back-of-the-envelope math,
Okay.
but ask the next question while I think about that.
All righty. Okay, Mr. Navarro, the question here says, what type of support does PG&E offer to projects using not only renewable energy production, example solar and wind, but also natural gas peaker power plants or even mini turbines to not only lower greenhouse gases, but to also lower energy costs locally to encourage local business development?
So there are a variety of incentives for both renewables and then also for things like fuel cells, which could be considered, and microturbines as well. That whole range, there are different levels of rebates. Right now, probably the highest rebates are in the fuel cells that are using what's called green gas or biogas, which is either landfill gas or gas that's, somehow there's a definition of what green gas is. I was going to try to get into it, but it may be more confusing than valuable. So that, yes, there are rebates for all of those technologies. I was recently at the fuel cell class, and they talked about that, and it's fairly attractive for businesses to look at fuel cells. Now, you do take a hit from a greenhouse gas perspective, in that the last report that I read from the California Air Pollution Control Officers, they were attributing a net gain in GHG if you were to set up your own fuel cell and use traditional system gas.
Thank you. Martha does have an answer. Does anyone need me to reread the question? We good?
So I think the question is, does an electric vehicle save you money even if you don't use solar? And my back of the envelope is, yes, it does, but you also need to include the cost of the car. But yes, it does. And I think that's here in Benicia at these high rates, that if you're already hitting the yellow, the red, and so on, those higher rates, switching over can still save you money.
Great. I'm down to just a few questions. So and I actually think we may have addressed this a little bit. It says, what possible finances for Armando? What possible finances financing, I assume, can be made to homeowners or landlords for emergency upgrade? I'm sorry, getting late. Energy upgrades, basic and advanced packages.
Right. So there is the energy upgrade program with the whole house incentive, and there is also incentives available for multifamily as well. So both, and this, by the way, the energy upgrade or the whole house incentive is available to both owners and renters. Obviously, the additional complication is you have to convince your landlord to allow you to do the retrofits, but it does not exclude renters from being able to participate in the program.
In terms of financing Energy Upgrade California, if you're a residential customer, your contractor can bring the financing with him or her. And there's two programs that are widely used. One is called EGA. It's essentially GE Capital run through the electric and gas, EGIA, Industry Association, and they have a loan program. The rates go from a low of like 8% up to 14 or 15%, and the contractor can give back some of the job costs to the financing partner and lower the rate. So it can be something you can negotiate with the contractor if you qualify for that loan. The other loan that we often see is issued by EnerBank, E-N-E-R Bank, and they offer a loan that for the first year has no interest, and then after that it's a pretty high interest rate, but homeowners use this to manage cash flow during the first year. And so there the contractor is giving, again, that some of the job costs back to the bank, but the resident sees it as, hey, I got a cash-free loan for up to a year, and thereafter if I take it, it's going to be something like a credit card rate.
Yeah. One of the solutions in Sonoma County was that the County of Sonoma created the PACE financing program, Sonoma County Energy Independence Program, and that basically is something that goes on the actual property and not on based on the credit of the homeowner. So that was another option. Now the complication that they ran into is that some of the national mortgage, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, actually sued to stop those programs from being in place because they felt like it actually put them at a disadvantage because those were not considered loans. They were property assessments, and they would be repaid first before the actual mortgage was paid. But that is another option that's still out there. Sonoma County continues to operate the program, which is basically where they've put up county money to help people finance energy efficiency and renewable energy projects.
So I'm going to disagree with you a tiny bit and say that Sonoma County is a real outlier. I know of no other county that has a continuing program in the residential area.
And I would just offer that we continue to look at those programs in Solano County, and hopefully we'll be implementing something as soon as we can satisfy our county treasurer that the county won't be at risk for them. I know the Sonoma program has been very successful, and I see Chuck Rieger in the back, and I also wanted to acknowledge that we have Elizabeth Patterson, the mayor, here. So, there's certainly a lot of talk and discussion about implementation of a program that will provide those kinds of incentives to homeowners in the near future. So, in fact, I think we were very close about a year and a half ago, and it through some obviously things that happened on the national level, those programs kind of came to a halt here. So,
just one additional comment. If you look at what happened in the solar industry, you used to buy solar and then finance it. And then they changed it to the solar lease, which is the merging of the two. And now a solar sales guy comes and says, no money down, this cash flow per month, we own the system, we'll take care of it. And all you're doing is just paying them at one price. And it's so simple. The product got redefined as the joint between how you pay for it and what it does. And in energy efficiency, we're still always in this two piles. I do it, and then I have to finance it. Typically, in this kind of world, only 20% of homeowners want financing. And 20% will never do financing. They run their whole house on cash. They don't even have a mortgage. So thinking that financing is the barrier in energy efficiency, I think is misleading, because we have 80% of the market that will do some financing or not, who knows, but it's not the barrier that's driving the problem. The problem is that energy efficiency is not as either visible as solar or does not have such a short payback. For example, Energy Upgrade California doesn't, those measures typically don't have a less than 1 year payback, for example.
Great. You know, I have one question left, and it's really, unfortunately, a rewind. It's not really a good end-up question. And actually, I thought we were kind of ending, but I don't want to have the writer of the question have his question left unanswered. And it goes back to the CFL discussion. Mm-hmm. And it's just a very simple question. It says, do CFLs contain B oxides as the long fluorescent tubes did or do? These can be ultra-toxic to a small percentage, 2% of the population.
So are we talking about the rare earth mineral compounds? Is that?
Since there's confusion over the question, and I didn't think it was a good one for ending anyway, why don't I ask the person who wrote that question to come forward at the end of the program, after the program, and ask it more efficiently. So I very, very much want to thank both Armando and Martha for the amazing presentations they did and the volume and the depth of the information that they provided. I think that one of the big takeaways for me is certainly that I need to be looking at an electric car the next time that I replace mine, and no better place to look than locally. And so with an electric car being built here in Benicia, and the promotion that electric vehicles got here this evening, we should all certainly be considering supporting our local economy as well. So with that, I also just want to thank Martha. Obviously, the kind of comments she makes about how cutting edge this city is also one of those things that should make all of us stand up proud, or at least all of you. Unfortunately, I don't live here, but make all of us stand up proud. And I actually was really interested. I don't know that if everyone in the room was really aware of the Benicia Home Efficiency Program and the opportunity to take advantage of learning more about how we can all reduce our carbon footprint and save money at the same time. And certainly from Armando, I really thought the opportunity to just do a self-assessment is something that we can all take advantage of. We can do it in the quiet of our own home, in our very own spare time, and come up with the kind of savings that will make a big difference in our community. So with that, I just want to thank both of them. I would like to close and also just thank Constance and the Sustainability Commission for putting these programs together. They're obviously amazing. And I'm also want to thank everybody that took the time to come tonight. This is a great turnout, and I know that we're all going to, I can't wait to go home and go online and really setting an appointment to have someone come and take a look at our home and figure out what we can do. But I also think that in the end, we need to remember just a kind of the words of Einstein from a long time ago. And he said, "We shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if mankind is to survive." And so on that note, I would like to thank all of you, our speakers again, and wish you a very good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Those were nice.